Inasmuch as Eve was the first to eat of the forbidden fruit, if she will covenant that from this time forth she will obey the law of the Lord, and will hearken unto your counsel as you hearken unto mine, and if you will covenant that from this time forth you will obey the law of Elohim, we will give unto you the law of obedience and sacrifice, and we will provide a Savior for you, whereby you may come back into our presence, and with us partake of eternal life and exaltation.
Adam, I now covenant to obey the law of the Lord, and to hearken to your counsel as you hearken unto Father.
Elohim, I now covenant with thee, that from this time forth I will obey thy law and keep thy commandments.
It is well.
This couple represent all of you as if at the altar. You must consider yourselves as if you were respectively Adam and Eve. We will put each sister under covenant to obey the law of the Lord, and to hearken to the counsel of her husband, as her husband hearkens unto the counsel of the Father. Sisters, each of you bring your right arm to the square. You and each of you solemnly covenant and promise before God, angels, and these witnesses at this altar, that you will each observe and keep the law of the Lord, and hearken to the counsel of your husband as he hearkens to the counsel of the Father. Each of you bow your head and say yes.
Yes.
That will do.
I am Ryan McKnight.
I'm Cara Santa Maria.
I am Christopher Smith.
Hi, I'm Andrew Torres.
This is Naked Mormonism,
the serial Mormon history podcast. Last week, we covered the experience of Increase McGee Van Dusen when him and his wife went through the temple endowment ceremony under the direction of Bloody Brigham Young. This earliest version of their expose, published in 1847, centered largely around Increase's male experience in the temple. He even said when his wife entered the room at one point of the ceremony that he hadn't thought of her since they'd been separated at the beginning of the ceremony. Today, we're going to focus on the women's perspective of the endowment ritual. I want you to take a minute to just sit back and try and put your mind in 1845 in order to contextualize this episode. This Victorian era of American history, shaped, moved, and ruled by men, women were a suppressed class of citizens with very little power to control their own lives. By and large, women's power in 19th century American culture was only exercised through the men she was able to convince to do something. It was another 60 years at the turn of the 20th century that women were being arrested for wearing pants in public. But the culture was so much deeper than just that. Women were always tasked with being the gatekeepers of sexual morality. Their worth was determined by their sexual purity and public modesty. A woman's virginity was lost, her entire worth was lost. What good was having a daughter to trade in a business transaction if she wasn't a virgin? This repressed culture of Victorianistic sexual ideals was a toxic way for people to live. Now, to take this mentality and culture even further, imagine being a Mormon in 1840s Nauvoo. You're already a maligned group in broader society, and rumors of polygamy have plagued the church's leadership since the earliest Kirtland days. Now rumors are being circulated about the endowment ceremony, that the attendees are naked and all sorts of abominations take place behind those closed doors. From an outsider's perspective, Mormonism looks like a giant wife-swapping sex ring manufactured for the benefit of the ruling men in the society. These rumors fueled much of the conflict which led to the Mormons being removed from Illinois and forced Bloody Brigham to take thousands to a place where they wouldn't be bothered. Because of these rumors, Mormon women were looked down upon by their non-Mormon Protestant counterparts in society. To clarify, there's not really any explicit evidence that sex rituals were happening in the temple, but from an outsider's perspective, what we discuss today will make it seem like women were just dragged into the temple for all nefarious sexual purposes of the Mormon elite. These rumors required answering by well-meaning women who didn't believe in the church but wanted to set the record straight. So let's begin with picking up on the Van Dusen expose to hear what Maria's experience was like. The expose that Increase and Maria published in 1847 was primarily under Increase's name, and it reads as if he was the primary or even possibly sole author. Subsequent editions, however, include passages from Maria about her experience. We're going to read a few excerpts from later editions of their expose to get Maria's take, after which we'll read from the Warsaw Signal of another expose published by a woman going under the pen name Emmeline. From Maria Van Dusen in the 5th edition of the Van Dusen Exposés, published in 1849. This was published under the title of Startling Disclosures of the Great Mormon Conspiracy Against the Liberties of this Country, being the celebrated Endowment as it was acted by upwards of 12,000 men and women in secret in the Nauvoo Temple in 1846 and said to have been revealed from God. That's the title. I think they really needed an editor. So here it is. This is Maria's take on the endowment ritual from 1849. Quote, "The order of initiation is as follows. A gentleman and lady pass through a narrow temporary hall, in the attic or upper floor of the temple, at the opposite end of which is a man stationed, whose duty it is to guard the door, and admit proper persons only. When he orders them to separate, passes the gentleman through a door to the right of the hall, and the lady through one on the left, where she finds herself in an unfurnished room with the exception of a few chairs. Here is a conductor, whose duty it is to examine her, to know who she is, where from, etc., after which she is divested of her outside apparel, all but chemise and stockings. She is next conducted back to quite a remote part of the temple, into a small room, say 16 feet square, where she is met by another conductor, whose duty it is to officiate in the strange ceremonies of this degree of initiation, when she is divested of the remainder of her clothing, which leaves her in a perfect state of nakedness. The conductor next takes this nude female into a bath of water and washes her all over, from head to foot, with a similar ceremony to what follows. I wash you for purposes thus and so, your eyes that you may behold the glory of God, etc. And it just continues on the same way that we discussed last week. So we're going to skip that. She is now pronounced clean and is taken out of the water. And after being placed in a standing position, the conductor takes a crooked cow's horn filled with highly perfumed oil and turns the contents on the top of her head, from which the whole naked person is anointed, from head to foot, by its being applied to every part by the hand of the conductor, rubbing it all over. She is next seated and ordained to be a queen from this time forth and forever. After this strange, unexpected, and most excitable ceremony is performed thus far, she is presented with and has put on a kind of undergarment, say chemise and drawers, somehow made into one, which has been prepared expressly for this purpose and forms a tight fit. In this garment are two particular marks cut, if I recollect right, the square on the breast and compass on the knee. The one on the knee signifies willingness to bow to the Lord, the other something else, protection, I think. They are told that this garment represents the white stone spoken of in Scripture, in which was a new name given, which no man knew but him which received it. The conductor now whispers a name in her ear, which she is never to reveal, except to a certain individual, Brigham Young, on a particular occasion. The meaning of this particular mystery she is made acquainted with on another occasion, when she is ordered to meet Brigham at the Veil, as it is called. After this new and queer-made article of costume is nicely fitted on, she is furnished with a chemise, nightgown, white stockings, and kind of muslin napkin. In this dress, she is conducted into another apartment where she is left alone for a short time, when she has an opportunity to try and reflect on the wonderful and unheard-of scenes through which she has just passed, at something of a loss to know whether it is a reality or whether she is not just rousing from a horrible dream or trance. Let's just take a pause here and try to understand what may have been going through the minds of the thousands of women who went through this ceremony in the Nauvoo Temple. Given the role and mentality of women in the culture of 19th century America, you go into the temple not knowing what to expect, and the first thing that happens is female temple workers strip you completely naked. wash you from head to foot, pour out a horn of oil on top of your head, and rub you all over your body with that oil, and pronounce you clean before the Lord before giving you a weird thin white jumpsuit to dress in. And then they lead you to a room and just leave you alone in complete silence to contemplate whatever the hell it was that you just experienced. In an age where women's individuality was seen as a problem to society, and women were to be seen and not heard, and never voice their own opinions or risk getting physically and emotionally abused by the head of the household, what would this situation do to your mind? What would you think? Not only that, but you're separated from your husband for the entire opening part of this procedure. Rumors were rife throughout Nauvoo that Mormonism was a sex cult. What was he doing while you're sitting here in silence in that room? Was he consummating a polygamous marriage with another woman in another room of the temple? Another variable worth addition here is the possibility of psychoactive plant substances being infused in the quote-unquote highly perfumed oil which was poured over your head. If any listeners have ever experimented with any of the entheogenic substances which could have made their way into that consecrated oil, you'll know that your mind simply operates differently when it's hopped up on those substances. Your mind jumps to thoughts you otherwise may never have had. It makes connections between thoughts that otherwise would have remained disparate had you never partaken of that sacrament. When dosed with an entheogen, happy thoughts become ecstasy, and melancholy thoughts become bottomless pits of despair and complete dissolution of everything you ever knew in life. The most adept shamans or spirit leaders can direct one's mind down any number of predetermined paths. Entheogenically altered hypnotism grants a lot of power to the hypnotist conducting a ceremony, and the dosed person basically loses autonomy. This temple ritual was an assembly line of mind control. At the very beginning, the person literally sheds their clothing and metaphorically removes any semblance of individuality or autonomy, and they become mental slaves to the person directing every action. What could possibly have been going through Maria's mind, sitting alone in that room, not knowing what her husband is doing? We can't possibly empathize with her. We can just read what she says. She continues, quote, "After having her mind calmed a little from the great excitement produced from this wonderful initiation, which has been about 2 hours' duration, she comes to the conclusion, however, that it is a reality, and has only now to wait the final result of this strange procedure. The object of this unheard-of initiation and the woman's being left alone here, in this particular dress and situation, will be fully realized by the reader after describing the initiation of the gentleman who accompanies the lady, and was separated from her at the hall of the first apartment of the temple." End quote. And then it continues telling the male side of the ceremony that we discussed at length last week. So we'll just pick up where the creation narrative talks of forming the woman from the man's rib. Quote, "After going through the ceremony as if in the act of taking the rib, etc., he," meaning Brigham Young, "passes out into the apartment where the woman has been placed for this purpose, and forms her of the rib. The particular manner in which this is done I will not explain. Suffice it to say, it is not very long, however, before he returns with the woman in place of no rib, and presents her directly before the man as he sits, head down in a profound feigned sleep, when Brigham calls out, 'Adam, here is thy companion. I give her to be with thee. What wilt thou call her?' The man now wakes up, salutes the woman, and says, 'This is bone of my bone, and flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man.'" And then it just continues on what we read last week. So let's just pick up where the devil speaks with Eve in the garden to continue to see how much of a mind-bending ritual this was for women going through. Just try to keep in mind what kind of a weird state of anxiety this must have put the women in throughout the entire ceremony from beginning to end. Quote, "And the woman said unto the devil," Orson Hyde, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, the Lord," meaning Brigham, "hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And the devil said unto the woman, Thou shalt not surely die, For Brigham doth know that in the day he succeeds in making you believe that this wonderful device of his and his associates is a revelation from God, and that he is commanded by him to palm it on you all as being a reward from God for building this temple, then your eyes will be closed to all virtuous principles, and you shall not be able to discern between God's truth and Brigham's lies. After this, he can also easily make you believe that God has given you to him and his associates for a spiritual wife, that a holy seed may be more speedily raised up to populate the Mormon city in the Great Salt Lake Valley, California, in order that his evil purposes may be accomplished. And when the woman saw the wonderful device of Brigham Young and his associates, she was deceived, and so was also the man, and their eyes were closed. And they were thus subjected in the future to be led by Brigham to California, and to do whatsoever he listeth to have done. And they knew that they were naked, and they had themselves furnished small aprons of white cloth, about 18 inches square, on which were green silk leaves pasted." End quote. After that, the ceremony acts out the original sin narrative, during which Bloody Brigham Young, the god of Mormonism at this time, tells the woman, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. And unto the woman he says, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow. Thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy spiritual husband, and he shall rule over thee." Exhibiting that this is indeed a later creation with some editorializing, the Van Dusens paint Bloody Brigham Young in the worst possible light with passages like this that he supposedly said to the men. Quote, "In the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread, till thou return not the dust, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. And thou shalt have no wife, for I desire to take her unto myself, spiritually, for I perceive she is young, fair, and desirable." End quote. Passages like this that we just now read make historians prefer earlier editions of this exposé where these passages aren't present. This was the 5th edition of this exposé, and it sold like hotcakes. The Van Dusens had notoriety for being the exposé writers, and people eagerly ate up any new versions that they published. So in order to make them increasingly more interesting, some license was obviously taken to make the ceremony more explicit and nefarious than the original 1847 edition of the exposé. And I'm going to read the next paragraph to make that case even further. Quote, "And Brigham Young said unto his designing associates, Parley P. Pratt, Orson Pratt, Eber C. Kimball, Orson Hyde, Wilford Woodruff, and numerous leading ones engaged in this great scheme, Behold, we have by this wonderful and unheard of device succeeded in deceiving the people. And now, lest some of them should go forth and tell to others what this secret consists in, and in this way we be defeated in our great undertaking, we will institute and administer a solemn oath and attach to it the most cruel penalty, when the man and woman are ordered to kneel at an altar on which is the Bible." End quote. So like I said, Bloody Brigham may have said that at some point, but Increase and Maria weren't in any kind of social circle to be privy to that conversation. This is a fascinating passage, but historians regard the 1849 edition as significantly less reliable than the 1847 edition because of this frequent editorializing, which expands on the original to an extent which actually strains credulity to a certain level. Continuing on the woman's experience in the ceremony. Quote, "After a variety of ceremonies of not much importance, a female conductor takes the man and leads him to what is called the veil, which separates the holy from the most holy place. In the veil there are a variety of corresponding marks cut, which were given at the 2 altars, the meaning all explained by Brigham Young, who stands behind the veil, which consists of a thin cloth drawn on a wire across the vacancy in the partition. After which the man is conducted through a door about 4 feet to the left, which is the entrance into the most holy place. Brigham next explains the objects of the marks in the veil to the woman alone, when he tells her she must have a corresponding one in a certain place in the foreground of her undergarment, which is his duty to perform. That's the cut on the knee. After which the woman is passed through the same door which the man has gone before, which brings them both into the celestial kingdom, where they are crowned king and queen, and which apartment forms a grand lodge also, where all the mysteries of the kingdom are taught by the leaders, such, for instance, as the plurality of wives system, when the women are seduced and led into all manner of abominable and licentious practices. In short, Everything which is of such a character that it cannot be made public is here taught and practiced. And this is the object, no doubt, of this wonderful initiation, to restrain the mind which has a tendency to do, so that, in case those abominable principles should be disbelieved by some, they cannot be told of by reason of the penalty." End quote. The endowment ceremony was weird. As more Mormons disaffected from the church, the rumors about it being a sex cult increased exponentially with this whole spiritual wife doctrine taught in the Holy of Holies. Any woman attached by name to the church could be branded in society as more so a commodity than she had been by the standards of the Victorian Protestant society in which Mormonism flourished. Here's a brief expose published in February of 1846 in the Warsaw Signal, with no name attached. This article alone fueled the narrative that Mormons were in a wife-swapping ring to an extent unheard of prior to its publication. When people wanted to know what was going on with those crazy Mormons, they went to Thomas Sharp's articles in the Warsaw Signal. This single article did a lot to shape perceptions of the Mormon endowment ceremony. Quote, "Ceremony of the Endowment. The saints have endeavored to keep the ceremony of the endowment perfectly quiet, but some of them have let the cat out of the bag and disclosed all. We have the story from two different sources, and as both correspond, we give it credit, although persons abroad not acquainted with Mormonism will loathe to believe that so much depravity as is evinced as in the invention of this ceremony can exist, and that men and women can be found who consider the obscene rites sacred. There must always be two candidates, a male and female, presented for the endowment at once. They must pay $1 each as a fee. If a male cannot find a female to take the endowment with him, the heads of the church provide one, and vice versa. The candidates are taken first into a room together, where they are stripped of all their clothing and are made to wash each other from head to foot. They are then separated and put into different rooms, where they are oiled with perfumed sweet oil by one of the functionaries of the church. They then pass into another room still separate, where one of the 12 pronounces a blessing upon them and gives them extensive powers and privileges, such as a plurality of wives to the male and other similar blessings to the female. The ceremony being ended, the candidates are brought together, still in a state of nudity, into a room where they are allowed to remain together, alone, as long as they see proper. They are then invested with their robes to take their departure. The really deluded amongst the saints consider this ceremony as sacred and intended as a trial of their virtue, but it was invented by the 12, evidently for the purpose of an opportunity for gratifying their brutal lusts." End quote. The thing is, that article isn't too far from the truth. It lacks a number of prominent details to put the information into context, but on the whole, the article described the ceremony as accurate, with the exception of the participants being nude for the entire endowment. It also provides false attribution in claiming that it was invented by the 12. The iteration of the endowment ceremony practiced in the Nauvoo Temple came from Joseph Smith when he introduced it in May of 1842, which is why we're talking about it now, while we're kind of bouncing around the timeline a little bit. The ceremony was merely adapted for large-scale practice, as was necessitated by the size of the temple and the number of participants passing through the mill. But false attribution is an understandable mistake. Joe initially intended the ceremony to only be practiced by the most promised elites of Mormonism, and likely would have expanded it upon the completion of the temple, but to be clear, the Quorum of the Anointed, where this endowment ceremony was introduced, was comprised almost entirely of Mormon elites. The endowment ceremony under Joe's watch was highly secretive and kept under wraps extremely well. And that's the entire reason we're relying so heavily on exposés written after Joseph's death, when the ceremony was given to thousands of people. When Joe initiated people into the Holy Order of the Anointed through this endowment ceremony, they were vetted as long-standing members of the church that he could trust. They didn't reveal the secrets. Once Bloody Brigham was passing thousands of people through the ceremony in the Nauvoo Temple, it was only a matter of time before people defected and revealed the secrets contrary to the death oaths. That was just an aside, though. Consider what it must have been like to be a Mormon woman in 1847 after these exposés made their way into the public, and everybody regarded Mormonism as a polygamous sex cult with oiled-up naked ceremonies where the leadership taught the doctrine of polygamy. Scandalous, isn't it? Mormons were already outcasts from the larger religious community. These ceremonies caused them to truly be demonized as the deluded fanatics they were, seeking to satiate the carnality of the leadership. One Mormon woman wrote a letter of clarification to Thomas Coke Sharp to be published in the Warsaw Signal in April of 1846. She was responding to the previous article that we just read. History has yet to reveal the true identity of this author, but she was definitely a member who likely didn't enjoy popular media lampooning her beliefs. Her expose reveals a deep inner conflict which she couldn't reconcile without losing everything. She only took the oaths of secrecy seriously as being enforced by Mormons, not God, as the ceremony claims. Quote, Mr. Sharp, dear sir, I discover by your paper, in what you have published in regard to the Mormon endowments given of late in the temple, that you have been wrongly informed at least, so far as actual experience has taught me in the orgies of an afternoon, in that, as I have been taught to believe, most holy building. In revealing what I am about to do, I have no lashing of conscience. Notwithstanding, I took upon myself, during the laughable farce, several oaths and obligations of a serious character, not to reveal the secrets of the priesthood. Had they been given me by anything other than assumed authority and vile, corrupt, licentious libertines, taking upon themselves the livery of heaven and essaying to represent the characters of our God and Savior, knowing these characters, as I did previously, to be the most debased wretches upon the earth, the whole farce appeared to be nothing less than fearful blasphemy. I went into this pretended holy operation in company with 14 others, all sisters in the Mormon church, and with most of whom I was well acquainted. They were, in the main, women of good character, and appeared sincere in their respective devotions. We were first received past the guard into a private room on the north side of the temple. This was the room of preparation of purification. We were divested of all our apparel, and in a state of perfect nudity. We were washed from head to foot. A blanket was then thrown about our persons, and then commencing at the head, we were anointed from head to foot with a sweet oil, scented, I think, with lavender. Brief pause here. Sweet scented oil. Olive oil isn't sweet, and every expose says that this oil is sweet. Emmeline says with lavender, but I would add that this perfuming could have been done to conceal any foul-smelling herbs, which were infused into the oil during the consecration process. You know, a lot of psychoactive herbs are very, very pungent, or the herbs themselves could have been giving off the sweet smell. It just kind of depends on what recipe they were using to consecrate this oil in order to pour out the Spirit of the Lord on these initiates. Back to Emmeline. We were then clothed in white robes. All this was done by sisters in the church, none others were present. It is false to say that men and women are admitted together in an indecent manner. We were then conducted into a room called the Garden of Eden. Here we found several of our brethren robed in white also, and apparently in a soporific state. And of course, soporific is like a drowsy or a drugged state, just to let you know. So Emmeline says explicitly that they were acting drugged. We were presented before them, and a voice of the Lord awoke them from sleep. After a considerable ceremony, which I do not recollect much of, we were left by the Lord, and soon a very dandy-like fellow appeared with a black cap on that had a long tail attached to it. He appeared very familiar, and by his very insinuating and friendly manner, induced some of our sisters to eat of the forbidden fruit. Soon after the voice of the Lord appeared again in the garden, we all appeared frightened, and both men and women huddled together in the corner of the room, as if in the act of hiding. The fellow in the black cap presents himself before the Lord and engages in a controversy, boasting of what he had done. The Lord pronounces a curse upon him. He gets down upon his belly and crawls off. At this period of the holy ceremony, I could not suppress my risible passions, for this fellow acted his part well. Undoubtedly, his part being the part of the devil, was the most natural. We were then presented with aprons, which were put on about this time. A sword was shook at us through the partition of the room, which was to guard the tree of life. After considerable ceremony, which I do not recollect, we were passed into another room, which was dark and was dreary. This was called the terrestrial kingdom. Immediately, the dandy in the black cap made his appearance. At first he appeared very sly, peeping about, and when he found the Lord was not present, he became very familiar and persuasive. Said he, "Here we are, all together, and all good fellows well met. Some Methodists, some Presbyterians, some Baptists, some Quakers, some Mormons, and some Strangites, etc., etc." Come, let us drink together. In this way he tempted us, and we partook with him. After a considerable parade and ceremony, we passed into another room, or celestial kingdom. Here I saw some of the 12, and particularly Brigham Young, with a white crown upon his head, and as I have since been told, representing God himself. There you go. What greater microcosm of all of Mormonism than Brigham Young sitting in a room with Quorum of the 12 with a white crown representing God himself. It's just beautiful. You can't make this up. We passed this room without much ceremony into another. I have forgotten what it represented. Not much of the interest transpired here, and we were conducted back and put in possession of our clothing, all save sister, and then it's blanked. She had a very fine alpaca dress stolen during her absence and has never been able to recover it. Imagine that. In the different apartments of this singular farce, we took ourselves oaths and obligations not to reveal the secrets of the priesthood. I did not consider them binding, as I have had ample and repeated opportunity to prove the administrators of these obligations as corrupt as the devil in hell. In one place I was presented with a new name, which I was not to reveal to any living creature, save the man to whom I shall be sealed for eternity. By this name I am to be called in eternity, or after the resurrection. The name was, and that's blanked out as well. And from all that I can gather, all the females had the same name given them, but we were not allowed to reveal it to each other, under no less penalty than to have our throats cut from ear to ear, our hearts torn out, etc., etc. I have forgotten a part of the penalties. In one place, something was spoken to me which I do not recollect. The meaning was marrow in the bone. The token was a firm hold of the hand, pressing the fingernails firmly into the wrist of the right hand. I have since been told by a brother that there was a mystical meaning in this that will hereafter be revealed to me. Now, sir, this is the substance of the Mormon endowment, and the Mormon who says it not true is a liar, and the truth is not in him. I have been a member of this farce of priestcraft for the last 6 years. The first 4 years I suspected nothing but what I was in the right of all holy things. The last 2 years I have been doubtful, seeing the abandoned conduct of the priests, but I toiled on, expecting something would be revealed in the endowments of the temple that would straighten my faith and qualify me for heavenly purposes. For this I have toiled by night and by day. For this I have worked my fingers to the quick, to gain something from my scanty allowance to assist in the completion of that building, the motto of which was to be Holiness to the Lord, and illuminated by the Shekinah of heaven. Imagine then my disappointment in the blasphemous farce I saw acted before me, and by men who have at repeated trials attempted to seduce me into the lowest degradation and ruin. But thanks to my heavenly protector, I have been enabled to withstand the shock, and hope and trust I shall outlive this disgrace of once being associated with such a sect of heartless scoundrels. I hope, sir, for the good of the community, you will give my revelation a place in your columns, for in the presence of high heaven I pronounce every word of it truth, and nothing but truth. Yours, Emmeline. End quote. Life was hard for women in Nauvoo Mormonism. Life was hard for women in the 19th century America. You know, I can read first-hand accounts from these women all day, but I can never get inside their minds. None of us can. Women were a subjugated class of people, and Mormons were a considerable minority beyond that. Mormon women were viewed as victims of brutish carnality at best, and promiscuous willing broodmares of a counterculture polygamous society at worst, with all the accompanying insults. I can't imagine what it's like to be a woman today. Trying to understand what it was like to be a woman as part of the rumor mill of Mormonism, with nowhere to turn, branded as fanatics, swearing oaths of secrecy and fealty and vengeance with mimed death penalties should you disobey and leave your priesthood-holding husband, only to just be ended up traded among Mormon elites as a commodity. I can't put my brain in that headspace. It's a tale as old as time. And I'll tell you what I mean by that right after we get a few reminders for events that we have coming up. Sunstone is coming up, everybody. Sunstone is the annual symposium in Salt Lake City all about Mormonism. It's a 3-day conference from July 26th to 28th, 2018, with panels on all topics surrounding Mormonism. A few talks that will be featured are Confessions of a Mormon Historian, concerning the recently published Leonard Arrington diaries presented by the editor, Gary James Bergera. Bergera? I'm not sure how to say his last name. So if you want to know the interplay and conflict between the apostles and church historian Leonard Arrington, that presentation is on Thursday at 5 p.m. and it is not to be missed. Also, D. Michael Quinn will be presenting on his most recent book, Mormon Hierarchy, Wealth, and Corporate Power, granting a surprising view into the shady world of Mormon money and politics, and that's on Saturday at 2 p.m. Also, John Larson of Mormon Expression will even be taking a brief hiatus from his retirement on All Things Mormon to talk Mormonism in the age of Trump, and that ought to be a pretty interesting presentation. And of course, Marie and myself are nearly done reading through the Doctrine and Covenants on My Book of Mormon podcast, so we're going to be presenting on what we have learned in the past 2 years of reading Joe's Revelations from cover to cover. That's going to be on Saturday at 10:15 a.m., and we'd really like to see you there if you can make it. So this year's Sunstone Symposium outgrew the University of Utah and will instead be held at the Mountain America Expo Center on State Street in Sandy, Utah. There's free parking, tons of food vendors, and good times will be had by all. So if you can make it to Sunstone, it'd be really cool to see you there. I'm also giving away a free ticket to Sunstone this year. The cost of tickets actually went up from last year to accommodate the new venue, so if you want to go for any or all of the days from July 26th to 28th, but you can't afford it, send me an email at nakedmormonism@gmail.com. This ticket giveaway is first come, first serve, and if I get a bunch of emails about this free ticket, it's going to go to the first email, but if a Patreon supporter sends an email, they're going to get preference for this free ticket. But I only have one Sunstone ticket to give it away, so you gotta get on this fast. If you want to go to Sunstone but can't afford it, or you haven't picked up your ticket yet for any reason, send off that email and we'll see if we can't get you in there for free. If Sunstone doesn't quite itch the Mormon scratch or you can't make it to Sunstone, Marie Kent and I have invited Colleen Dietz of Mormon Happy Hour to do a live show on the demise of Joseph Smith at Squatters. That's going to be on Friday, July 27th. It's a $5 entry fee to pay for the venue, and we're getting started at 8 p.m., and we're going to be, mingling prior to and after the show as well. So if you want to hear the martyrdom story that you're not going to learn in any of the church videos or books that they publish, you are not going to want to miss Squatters Pub, July 27th at 8 p.m. at 147 Broadway in downtown Salt Lake City. We really hope to see you there. So with all of that said, July is an extremely busy month for us, and we really hope to keep you posted on everything as they develop. And if you're listening to the show in August, you're going to hear all about Sunstone and everything that happened in July. Now, with all of that, let's get back to the tale that's as old as time. There's an archetype worth noting at the center of Mormonism. When we view the founder of Mormonism through a patternistic lens, the pieces begin to fall into place. One word can summarize Joseph Smith and explain so many of his actions and decisions. More. More money, more power, more followers, more women, more of everything. He always wanted more. He's not the first. He isn't the last. Joseph fits perfectly within a pantheon of demagogues in constant pursuit of more. The interview on episode 2 of Glassbox Podcast was with my good friend Deb, who's recently been studying Muhammad while she's reading through the Quran on one of her podcasts, and she kept telling me that anytime she reads something on Muhammad, that Joseph Smith must have known Muhammad's history to emulate him so closely. And, of course, I'm paraphrasing. You'll have to go listen to it for yourself. But the point is, Joseph fits comfortably among so many men throughout history who followed similar trajectories of gluttonous wealth and power. He shouldn't be revered above and beyond any other religious or secular leader who would stop at nothing to climb atop a heap of ruins that they manufactured to rule over. Joseph Smith is merely one more data point on the scale of tyrants throughout human history. What can be certain, Joe didn't die at the crux of his career. He died on the upward trajectory, and he had grand plans for his community of followers and his great war machine Talos, slowly progressing through the construction phase throughout the 1840s. I don't know how else to say this, but Joseph Smith wanted to take over the entire world, starting with North America. Anybody in a position like his had to employ some kind of litmus test to ensure his followers were devoted, and they wouldn't betray him. He could only share his deepest, darkest desires with people that he knew that he could trust. Thus, the Holy Order, the Quorum of the Anointed, was created, and the endowment ceremony became that litmus test. May 4th, 1842. Joseph and Hyrum Smith forever shaped Mormonism with the introduction of this endowment ceremony, thus creating the Holy Order, the Anointed Quorum. The following day, they went through the ceremony to become initiated into the Anointed Quorum themselves. Let's be very clear, one of the primary purposes of the Quorum of the Anointed was to initiate people into the doctrine of the new and everlasting covenant of marriage, polygamy. Mormons were on a need-to-know basis. If certain elites were going to practice polygamy, Joe had to make sure they were on the up and up, and they wouldn't betray him. More than half of the original 9 members of the Quorum had more than one wife before Joe died, and the majority of the inducted members after this initial 9 were polygamists. But polygamy was merely one aspect of the Holy Order. Historians have long claimed that the Holy Order was for spiritual rejuvenation, not for political purposes. The Council of 50 was Joe's political body, but the Council of 50 evolved from this anointed quorum as Joe's cabinet for his presidential campaign and body of advisors for the overthrowing of the government. The anointed quorum was made for the culling the unworthy who may balk at a religious fanatic attempting to overthrow the government. Only the elect Mormons could go into the temple and receive this endowment procedure. Only then could they be trusted with the secret designs of Mormonism seeking to become the new world theocracy. From its inception to restore Zion to Jackson County, Missouri, to Utah gaining statehood in the mid-1890s, Mormonism's sole purpose was to become the one true religion and build Zion on the American continent, so that the earth may be renewed and receive its paradisiacal glory. Mormonism we have today may be 110 years removed from these more bloody and evil theocratic notions, but it's not fundamentally different. These are the depraved roots of Mormonism, and what good fruit can come from evil and corrupt roots? It cannot be done. This is Mormonism. Today's church may be softer and less boldly theocratic, but that's only because the morality of the secular world has forced it to soften. The Mormonism of Joseph and Brigham's day was ruthless and horrific. Those in opposition were lucky to have an article published in the WASP about them. It should be no mystery why the Mormons were violently removed from Illinois, after having been violently removed from Missouri, after their violent removal from Ohio, all beginning with violent actions taken against the prophet back in New York at the inception of this nightmare. Sure, the church today can cause people to do good things, but that's the humanity in individuals doing those benevolent acts. The church itself, since day one, has been a shamelessly corrupt and debased system of theocratic rule. Nothing can extricate the church today from these malicious roots. I'm going to let Mr. Increase McGee take us out for the night. Quote, a remark. Now the man that led the 12 or 15,000 through this farce has gone with the main body of the Mormons to California with the express understanding, to my certain knowledge, of carrying out these principles among the Western Indians and all whom he has influence over. He told others that were at Nauvoo, those who were not let into these temple mysteries, for all did not go in for want of time and opportunity, that when they got to California, there would be a tent pitched in the wilderness for the Indians' benefit and all others that had not an opportunity at the temple in Nauvoo. The idea is, if they had not been driven from Nauvoo, all the Mormons in all the world would have went there in their turn and received their great anticipated blessing, which I have described in the few pages to the very letter, in substance particularly for the benefit of those who were under this wicked leader's influence. After Smith's death, he issued his proclamation to all the Mormons in the United States that they must come forthwith to Nauvoo, and the Lord would tell them what to do when they get there. He takes us in the temple in secret and says, "This is the Lord's will, that you are to cease preaching to these United States and to go to other nations. This is the reason why you see so few preaching here," hence the remark, "I think they are all about broken up." I know of thousands of young and able-bodied men who had all this secret instruction with me in Nauvoo the winter before they left, and are now actively engaged in making converts in foreign nations and the islands of the sea, and are instructed to go west after this Brigham Young, the wickedest man probably now on the earth. While I am writing this, let no one say it is persecution or fiction. I would not say one word on the subject if I did not know the awful consequences of carrying out that aspiring man's principles. Look for one moment at its awful effects. He has actually issued this proclamation to all the Mormons in all the world where they are to now center at California and build another city. There are some of them already there, with access to some of the most secluded and powerful tribes of Indians to the world. Now suppose his principles are carried out, as I am certain they will be. Who cannot see but there will be great trouble and loss of thousands of lives of innocent men, women, and children? No, if there was no deception in this almighty machine and engine of death, this secret farce, I would say nothing. But how can I hold my peace when I know the foundation of a scheme that cannot fail of the literal ruin of my fellow men? Oh, if I was in possession of sufficient eloquence, I could here write a true picture of consequences that would make their hair raise on the reader's head. Only contemplate for a moment. A few thousand have already arrived at their destined home between the Rocky Mountains and the West Sea, with good reasons, as they suppose, for forming this conspiracy against the government. Thousands already under their influence, all calculating to go to that place with an inducement that the Lord has in the Nauvoo temple and will reveal great secrets essential to their salvation. Now this is all brought on by degrees. By the time they pass through all hardships they necessarily must in getting there, they are pretty well instructed and prepared to believe it is of God. I mean, this great farce that they are all calculating to go through when they get there, the consequences must follow. That if this principle is carried out only for very few years, it must result in civil war. For, depend on it, when people make anything their religion, I don't care what it is, they will fight for it with good courage. That's going to do it for today. Be sure to get your email into nakedmormonism@gmail.com with Sunstone ticket in the subject line to get that free ticket to Sunstone. I only have one to give away, so first come, first serve. Also, the Sunday after Sunstone, I'm going to be presenting at a local Davis County ex-Mormon meetup some of my research on the Smith entheogen theory. Now, this is a closed session, and it won't be recorded and put online because I've been advised by a few people that I deeply respect to keep my research on the Smith entheogen theory on this side of the veil until the book is ready. But if you want to know the latest developments in my personal research for the eventually forthcoming Smith entheogen biography that's in the works, get in touch with me via email at nakedmormonism@gmail.com or on social media, and I'll share the details with you of that lecture. It's going to be pretty small and quite intimate with Q&A throughout the entire, presentation. It's not going to be kind of a formal lecture style with Q&A at the end or anything. So if you want to attend that, if it sounds like fun and you want to hear the newest developments on research of the Smith entheogen theory, get in touch and I'll make sure that you have the details to attend that. With that, we have a few new patrons to thank. Looks like we have Gregory, Jacob, and Kent. And Kent actually posted a very kind comment on the previous episode and saying that he'd become a patron. So thank you, Kent, and thank you to Gregory and Jacob for pledging to support at patreon.com/nakedmormonism. And also a quick note for anybody who is a supporter of the show on patreon.com. This week was a very special Patreon-only episode. Andrew and Thomas of the Opening Arguments podcast invited me on to their show to review a Mormon law movie called Day of Defense, apparently based on a book by the same title. It was truly a horrible movie. We had a really good time lampooning it for their Lawd Awful movies. So if you support this show, you get access to that one episode of Lawd Awful movies that we did. It was so much fun and it's truly not to be missed. So if you are a supporter on patreon.com/nakedmormonism, be sure to check your Patreon-only feed to get access to that. And of course, patrons of this show get a ton of extra content, including an extended edition of this episode where I talk about the evolution of the endowment ceremony from 1842 to today. So you don't want to miss that either. So if you can spare $1 a show, that's literally sparing 1 cup of coffee per month at your favorite coffee shop. Your hard-earned money funds the tireless research required for this show, and it spurs further content creation. And for that, I thank you so much. With that, let's close it up for the night. Thank you so much for listening and hitting that download button, and I'll talk to you next time here on the Naked Mormonism podcast. This podcast is produced with the help of Julie Briscoe as production assistant and director of social media, and Brian Ziegenhagen as